everybody. I tell you, I love that song. Every week I love that song. Sarah, if you're watching, I love that song. She's off today, so I love it. So anyways, so good to see all of you here in person. Welcome. You doing okay? Yeah, pretty nice day and everything. Did anyone survive the thing called the garage sale? Woo, Nelly. But wow, great time, great time. Those of you on the other side of the screen, we welcome you. We're glad that you can join us. We know we have a lot of people that not only are from Asbury, but are outside of Asbury Church, and we're grateful that you can join us tonight. Are your folks watching tonight by chance, I wonder? Hello there in Indiana. So we're going to have a good time tonight. Well, we've had some great speakers, amen? I mean, oh my goodness, every week they've just been so good. Last week with Tim Quiggle, as he shared, and the timing was so good because we then began the baby bottle ministry, and so don't forget to pick up one of those if you want on the way out if you've not done so. It's just a great ministry, and we'll do that from this Sunday on, no, right now, right Jessica? Right now till Father's Day, so get that in. Just great speakers. Wow, it's been great. Tonight, we have another goodie. I'm telling you what, this guy just spoke a couple weeks ago here. Good stuff, wasn't it? And yeah, what would you have done if they'd have gone, you know, kind of set people up. But anyways, we're really happy that Nathan can join us tonight. I just thought, you know, you maybe don't know his full story. I don't know that you know all of our full stories, but to know him just a little bit better and a little bit of how God orchestrated him coming here to Asbury, I think that's part of this story we want to talk about tonight. We're grateful, Mr. and Mrs. Snyder, that you allowed your son to come to Kansas. So we're grateful that he's here with us at Asbury, and so I think all of you would agree with that. So let's welcome Nathan Snyder here tonight, all right? How you doing, buddy? All right. Now, Nathan, he's probably a little nervous because he's never quite sure what I'm going to say. And what he'll do is he'll sneak over to somebody else in the staff and he'll go, "Was he serious?" And I don't know if I was or not. I'm just going to keep you guessing, brother. But anyways, we're glad that you're here. Nathan, for those of you on the other side of the screen that don't know, he is our worship pastor here. And there's a lot of things, as our staff knows, that the fine print. There are a lot of things that are written in the fine print that you end up doing. And so he's learning that a little bit, but we're really happy to have you. So we're glad you're here, Nathan.
Thank you.
Doing all right?
Here. Yeah.
All right. Well, and we'll have to make sure he uses his outside voice. Or that, Mark, you really crank him up because... you know, he's not quite as noisy as I am. But, so, what do you think? How do you like the story so far? And now that you're a star.
I'm usually way up there in the balcony.
Yeah, you are.
I have a little different view today.
Many times people don't realize that it's you up there, 8 o'clock service especially. He's here every week. Just know that, but he's up there running some of the tech. So, anyways, tonight it's Michael's turn, and he's up there, and I think we have all the little green lights working and everything, so thumbs up, so that's good. All right, we just got back, you and me and Mary Lou, we went out and ate, and we're sitting here kind of like, oh, man. Like I told the board last night, I have stock in copper oven. And we were there again tonight, so anyways.
You probably need to get stock in Tums, too.
Yeah, a stock in Tums. So I think you're going to have to turn him up, Mark, or you're going to have to talk louder because I'm not sure they're going to hear you. So anyways, okay, tell us a little bit. You come to us from Indiana, right? So tell us a little bit about the Hoosier State and your growing up there.
They like basketball.
Yeah.
There's lots of corn, so it's not too different from here. It's really a fairly similar city. I was close to Indianapolis. It was probably twice the size of Wichita, but it kind of has a similar feel. I grew up in an area called Avon, right outside of Indianapolis, and it's kind of comparable to Mays, so it's a suburb, but it was pretty nice.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So you have how many in your family, sibling-wise?
Just one.
Just one.
I have an older brother.
Older brother, okay. How many years older?
6.
6 years older, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what's he do?
He works for Rolls-Royce. He's an engineer.
Engineer for Rolls-Royce. Have you seen what he's driving? Come on, Nathan's brother. Help the guy out here.
I'm the creative one.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Creative people don't get paid.
Oh, man. Well, so you went to high school there in Avon?
Yes.
Yeah, and then you graduated and went to?
I went to Purdue.
And he's a Boilermaker.
Only 50%. Well, okay, I claim the Boilermakers, but I bounced between Purdue and their Indianapolis campus with Indiana. So I went to Purdue for a year, then I went to IUPY, which is Indiana and Purdue, and then I went back to Purdue, then I went back to IUPY, and I graduated.
Wow, you're schizophrenic. But you graduated from Purdue then? Well,
no.
it's a combination.
Combination.
Yeah, yeah.
Technically, I have an Indiana degree, which kind of pains me. They're Purdue's rival, so
Yep,
it's
yes,
funny
they
that
are.
they have a campus together.
Yeah. So you got tell us what you got your degrees in, because you got your major and a minor.
Mm-hmm. So I have a music marketing major, and I have a psychology minor.
And that after I found that out, and I probably didn't pay enough attention on the front end when we hired him, but then later on he's asking these really weird questions, thinking, he's a psycho. No, he's a psychologist. But anyways,
maximizing that minor.
Yeah, he's a thinker, as you all know. He's a processor. He's one of those, you know me well enough right now. It's probably going to be out of my mouth too soon. And Nathan sits and chews on it a little bit and processes it and works through it. And we need both of those types and the Susans in between. So we need all of gifts to make it happen. So some of your hobbies.
Well, I obviously play guitar. You guys see me do that every week. I really like playing drums. I do a lot of home recording, songwriting. I play basketball. I play video games. I play frisbee golf. I barbecue. I have an endless amount of hobbies, and I never get bored.
He does like to do a lot of recording. He has a variety of instruments there. Not only can he play the drums, percussion, of course guitar. You've seen acoustic guitar, electric guitar. He does some keyboard work. We've not yet really plugged him into that here, but I think I'd like that to happen. Oh, key of C, C, F, G, 1, 4, 5. You can do it. So he'll be fine. And then, just some of your mixing you do. You have a kind of like a studio in a way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what do you do with that?
I record like rock and roll, basically, and also instrumental underscores that I send off for film licensing, and it's usually small stuff, but internet ads will pick it up and things like that.
Yeah.
Now, I'll occasionally get something that's a little bit bigger, but it's kind of cool.
He has an alter ego, and goes by the name
Vandarth.
Vandarth. Vandarth. Go on YouTube, look up Vandarth, and you'll see this guy playing rock and roll music and whatever else. And you've got a CD out. I mean, you've got what do you call them these days? CDs? Albums? What do you call them?
I still listen to CDs.
Yeah, CDs, okay. And so, we've got one that you can stick in still the old-fashioned way and listen to it that way. But you can listen online. You can listen on Spotify, probably Amazon. You can probably listen to any of
all that stuff.
So go out tonight and support your local worship pastor, a.k.a. Vandarth, and get a CD and listen to his music. It's probably not. No, you played a little bit of it out here that one night, right?
Yeah, the lighter stuff.
The lighter stuff. So you have a connection with a lot of the bands in town.
Mm-hmm.
For what reason?
I book bands for one of the breweries in town, and I used to run a podcast. That's how I met a lot of them, but I kind of stopped doing that when the brewery church started because there was too many podcasts, too much to do.
Yeah.
Kind of had to pick some priorities.
So how many bands do you think you know, or how many bands are you booking over there?
About 14.
14?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you might remember we did that special Christmas video, and we had a drummer come in, and Shane, right? Wasn't that his name, Shane? Oh man, unbelievable drummer, and just really, he helped us out with that Christmas video, and that was part of the connection you had through those bands and through the Brewery Church and so forth. So some of what we have as far as our musicians, that's kind of coming out of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where Turner's from.
Yeah. So last Sunday we had a lead guitar. If you recall, he was right playing here, and he kind of wanders around when he plays guitar. His name is Turner, and that's how we got him here, was through Nathan's connection at the Brewery Church. Mm-hmm. So, and then of course you've got another drummer now, Hannah Mel's brother, Joshua. That's not through the Brewery Church, but a variety of things. So digital recording, guitar lessons. You do guitar lessons.
Yes,
How many students do you have right now?
I only have 2 right now.
2. Mm-hmm. Yep. He was working with Susan a little bit, then life happened, and so you know how that goes. But practice? What do you mean practice? No, you got to practice. But he's working with 2. Sometimes you do it here. You do lessons here. Where do you do it?
Most of the time it's at my house, but I give Susan lessons here.
Yep.
I used to have another student that came here.
Yeah, there was a person I know I'd walk in and you were doing some lessons with the person. So if anybody needs lessons on the side, there's your man. He'll start you with the easy chords. It'll be fine. And so, do you do the theory, music theory with people?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, anyways, well, so what else do you do though? So when you came to me, you handed me this. Well, you didn't hand it to me. Sarah handed it to me. But so we get this resume, and of course I pick up on worship and all that goes on with worship. At the time, I was looking, not looking. We'd gone through a little bit of a change. We'd had a little bit of if you recall, we'd had a little bit of a financial freeze for a little bit, and we were just kind of taking it easy. Hadn't really hadn't put the word out at all. And all of a sudden, I get this 2-page resume, maybe 4-page, because you also had your marketing piece on there. So tell us about the marketing side of you.
Okay. I got into Facebook marketing because I'm a musician, and that's kind of one of the big ways that musicians are reaching people nowadays, through Instagram, Facebook, and all that. So I took some courses maybe a year before I came down here, and I had learned some of that stuff. I found it really interesting. I liked all the numbers. When I was a kid, I liked to play SimCity games. Anybody know about SimCity? Mm-hmm. You build the city and you manage all the economics and stuff, and I kind of viewed the numbers and marketing as a video game, so it was fun for me. So that's kind of how I got into that.
Yep. So he comes with this marketing stuff. I wasn't really thinking about the marketing piece. I was thinking more about the worship piece as we looked through that. So tell us how you dropped your resumes off here. What was happening there? Why did you do that?
Oh.
Why in the world did you do that?
That's a complicated question. So obviously I was looking for a job, but it's weird how that happened, because I'd been at another church. I got let go. I just kind of wasn't really a good fit for what they wanted, and I wasn't totally sure if I wanted to go back into leading worship at that time, because I was just a little shy about it after that. I'd also been going through a divorce, so when I came in, I told you that, and I told you about this brewery church we were starting, and I thought, there's no way they're going to hire me. Like, that's pretty much the, silver bullet there. And I almost didn't come in, though. I tried everything I could do to try to do marketing, to just take a break from working in a church for a little bit, just while I kind of got my wheels under me. And I tried to contact like 100 different businesses to see if I could do freelance marketing for them. And I walked in probably 30 places. I called a bunch of places. I emailed a bunch of places. There's only 2 places that called me back. This is one of the last places I came. And I looked out the window, because I live like 4 houses down. I looked out the window several times, and I thought about walking down here. And then I thought, nah, not yet. So I didn't. But the 2 places that called me back were you and the brewery that we started the brewery church at. And they didn't know me either. I just walked in there one day and started talking to the guy and asked him if we could start this group there. So out of about 100 places, there's 2 places that called me back, and they both had to do with brewery church or church. And so I kind of thought, okay, that must be some kind of signal to proceed. God telling me, maybe I'm supposed to stay in this field for a while. So I did. Ironically, 6 months later, I was thinking about COVID, and most of the places that I was going to try to market for, they were all shut down during COVID.
Yeah.
So if I had gotten what I wanted, I would have been out of work again.
Yep.
And I only had about a month's worth of money to make it before I had to get a job. So I got this job like just in time. Otherwise, I wasn't sure if I was going to have to put my house up for sale or not. So it was a very, it was a very stressful time, and everything just kind of fell into place like that. It was.
I'm going to jump in here for a second because so I see this guy walk by my window. Didn't think a thing about it because people walk by all the time over by my office. And all of a sudden, my phone buzzed. It's Sarah. And Sarah goes, "Hey, you might want to come over here. You might want to check this out." So I said, "What you got?" She says, "Well, just come over here." And so I went over to her office, and she hands me this resume. And so I'm looking at it going, whoa. Oh. So I looked through that. I said, she goes, "What do you think about that?" I said, "I think we ought to pursue it. We ought to check into this a little bit." The guy just drops in out of the sky. We hadn't put anything out there, nothing. And yet we'd had the conversation. You remember, we had a little conversation about, what it looked like as we moved ahead and stuff, and, thinking about some new things, and anyways. So I can't remember if I called you or emailed. I think I emailed you, and you emailed me right back. And so we set up a time the very next day, and you came in. Of course, he's pretty gun-shy coming in, and he begins to tell me, and I'm asking some of the questions. And as he said, he came in at a difficult time of life. He was going through a divorce. We're not going to go through all the details and all the stuff of that. Life happens. Stuff happens to the best of you, and so you just have to trust that we had the conversation about what was going on. And so he was going through that. He was going through some struggles from the previous place he'd worked, and some, churches are not always the easiest place to work for. And here he is showing up at a church, and then he tells me, in his quieter Nathan voice, "He's in a brewery church." And I go, "That is so cool." And he looks at me like, "Really?" You remember? You went, "Really?" And anyways, you tell a story. It's you.
Yeah, it's kind of like a state of disbelief at first. Like, huh? Depending on who you talk to, it's not the most popular idea.
Yeah. And why? Tell a little bit about some of the responses you got about you doing a brewery church.
Yeah. The idea was to meet where people are comfortable going, where they're already having conversations in life. And a lot of my friends and a lot of my music connections, they're hanging out in breweries. And I discovered sometimes they're even talking about God. And I thought, wow, that's awesome. I realized the original plan was to make another worship service at my last church. But as we kind of started to talk about that, we realized, I think these people are not going to go to church. That's a step too far for maybe where they're at, 'cause maybe they don't have any church experience, or maybe they've, struggled. Maybe they've had a bad experience. So the idea was to make a place that's kind of like a middle ground where they could go. They're already familiar in that environment, and they're comfortable. But I've noticed that whenever we run, because we run Facebook ads all the time, when we run Facebook ads, it only takes 12 hours or so before somebody pops on there, and it's usually the alcohol that they have a problem with. So sometimes they're pretty scary about it too. So we try not really to get involved in the debate about it, but it's a reality that we face. And then the concern becomes the people that we're marketing to. They see our ad. If they read the comments, they could be like, wow, this looks like a firefight. I don't want to go anywhere near religion right now, because they see the fighting there and then they see it on the TV. So we find ourselves in this weird mediator position where we're sort of trying to repair relationships between some people in the church and things like that. It's a role that the more I do this, the more I realize this is necessary, and I almost need more people to take on that challenge, to go out there and try to heal some of these relationships.
Okay, before we go too far into the brewery church, because we do want to spend some time there. So he comes, so I call him up. We've had the conversation, and I said, we want to make Asbury, we want Asbury to know we are not condoning the alcohol thing. We're not out saying, hey, everybody make sure you go buy a six-pack so you can go down or whatever. We're not talking about that. And we also know that people have gone through addictions. We also know those things. We know, and we've had conversations with people in here over the concern of that. So we're not talking about the approval of some of those things that can take people down a road we don't want them to go. But many are already on that road, so how do we keep them from getting in the ditch? And so, in where they are, when you're not going to get their butts in the pews, how can we do that? So you and I talked about that, and we thought, well, what's it look like for Asbury even to come alongside? And we're still in that conversation. But here he comes as this. We bring him on as a part-time. He's part-time. I don't know if you realize that, because he's also 20 hours a week at the brewery church. So he's part-time here, although we push him, as he well knows. Many of you probably think he's full-time, but he does a lot for us. And so, as you know, he likes guitar. He likes, when I think of newer stuff, I still do like some of that 70s, 80s stuff that doesn't take you through a bunch of up and down chords and bridges back and forth and a whole bunch of music playing before you ever sing and stuff. And I understand the reason for that. I like congregational participation as best as possible, no matter what the genre of music is. And so I knew that about him. He comes in and he brings this rock and roll guitar. I'm thinking, man, we are going to get serious here. But most of it he does on his acoustic. But so he, as you know, he's introduced some newer stuff, and actually the new stuff, the stuff that's very current. And then I always remind him, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we're all because I always still want to know, what are we going to be hanging on to 5 years from now, 10 years from now, those kind of things. So it's a good mix. I think it's a good thing, because I'll throw these hymns at him and he'll go. Now, he was raised in the church, right? You were raised. Yeah. Tell us about your church growing up.
I grew up in a church that was kind of similar to this church, actually. It was a Methodist church, and they had only hymns until I was in about 6th grade. And then they brought in this band that moved over to Indiana from Illinois. And, they were like rock and roll praise band type of thing. And so from that point on, I started going to that service. So I had hymns for a little bit, but even when I got the hymnal out here, I'm like, these aren't the same hymns I remember. I know a lot of the majors, but there's a lot of hymns that I'm like kind of learning as we go.
Yeah.
So.
And one of the things I always have to be careful of is assumptions, to assume that he would even know what there is a balm in Gilead, and he's going to go, what do you mean there's a balm? We're working through all that, and it's good. It's good to expand our horizons and so forth. The other piece that we've found with Nathan is the marketing piece. Talk about that here at Asbury.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so at some point we started running Facebook ads here, and that was something that we hadn't really tapped into yet. But when I was learning marketing for music, what you could do is you could send content out to people who are interested in that content. So, if you're marketing cupcakes. You can find people who love cupcakes, and you can say, hey, buy my cupcakes. That's just a silly example. But
I'm hungry
we
now.
could, dessert.
Yeah, dessert.
We could potentially make podcasts or videos and things like that are geared towards people we want to reach. So we kind of started exploring that. Now, once they engage with your ad or your content, you can remarket to them. And so that's kind of something we started exploring, and more recently we moved into the recording podcasts and stuff like that, which we're getting ready to launch.
Yep. So, the fine print then under worship pastor was marketing. And so he and Sarah, and of course Sarah's thrilled about it because, that's under her umbrella. And so here all of a sudden something called COVID hits. Well, man, we've got, all of a sudden, none of you are here. And we've got to figure out how do we market? How do we get out there? How do we find out who's watching? And so tell us a little bit about like analytics and stuff. I mean, because you helped us with some of that.
Yeah, so we're able to see like the age groups and even maybe where people are watching from, what cities and stuff like that. So we kind of got an idea of who was watching and also maybe what age groups were missing that we wanted to reach in the future. So because all the churches, every church is kind of looking to try to reach some younger people because they're not going to church the way that they were maybe 20 or 30 years ago. So that's some valuable information. But also as we plan events and we make new content, we'll also be able to see who resonates with what. So if we find something that works, then we can keep going down that road. And if it doesn't work, then we kind of go down a different road.
Yeah, and what we found, of course, and he's helped us with this, is during COVID, when everybody was at home, it was important how we began the service. What catches them, what grabs them and stuff. But when you're here live, when you're here in person and stuff, we have to be mindful of who you are and and how it is we minister both to those here as well as out there. And so you've got to switch gears a little bit. That's why if you've noticed the way we've done announcements lately, we've been tweaking that around because things change, in person, live stream, etc. And so like, you can tell us, and we found as you were showing us, like when they shut off. I mean, you can tell us about that.
When they watch a video, we can see when people stop watching. So if we put a 30-minute video out and they make it 5 minutes in and then they stop right there, then we can see when were they most engaged, when did they stop watching, and things like that, and then we can adjust and try to do better.
Yeah. And so in this process, then tell us about then as we move, because the fine print keeps getting finer. But as we think about then discipleship and how how marketing fits into that, and let's do the mountain of opportunity thing just for a moment.
Okay.
Just help them understand that.
Okay, so as a marketer, I was trying to think of what is a handshake? Like, what is our first introduction to a person? And then we almost want to design, not just in marketing, but in church events, what is the next step? Like getting to know somebody, and what would be a good event for that, or a good online content for that to help them get to know us and go a little bit deeper. And you want to move them all the way to the point where they feel like they know Asbury, they trust Asbury, and they're invested, they're growing, they're learning along with us, and ultimately get them to the point where maybe they're looking to share what we do with other people. So that's kind of, if you've seen the Mountain of Opportunity graphic, that's what we came up with to kind of illustrate that, and we were trying to figure out, okay, Asbury's got all these different things. We've got some small groups, we've got some events. How do we position these things so they flow like a path, like a person's journey from hello to I'm getting to know you to I'm part of the family?
Yep. Family being at the top. That's kind of the language we used. Family, where we have the intimacy of that and a trust and all that goes with that. So, and then it's different whether it's a virtual audience or whether it's the in-person people and how we do that.
Yeah.
And so you've helped us with that. So, okay, let's get back to worship for just a little bit, because one of the things is how is it you understand what do you want the people to experience when we talk about worship? I didn't warn you of this, but it's a good question.
I just want them to connect with God. That's pretty much it. I mean,
Well, that was short. Well, I was thinking 10 minutes there.
well, that
Well,
could
what are
mean a
ways
lot
we
of
can?
things.
Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, if your desire is that you pretty much want us to connect with God, how do we do that? What are the ways that we can do that? Is it purely through an electric guitar?
No, that's an interesting question because I think God works in lots of different ways. So he could work through the music itself, he could work through the lyrics, and he could work through the other people in this room. So I guess it's more than I want them to connect with God, but each other too, because that's supposed to be kind of like a family thing. And I always think it's interesting. Some people really connect to vocals in a song and singing, and that's it, or words. But I connect to both that and music. So if somebody plays a guitar solo, it's like God made music, and it's this amazing thing, and it almost shows me a dimension of God that you don't necessarily get out of the words. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit different for me.
So what do you do when I had a person at another church I served, and they came in and they said, I wish we didn't have any music. So how can you worship with a person like that? How do you help that person worship?
I realize that singing is not for everybody, but I even think someone can worship without singing, just being a part of the music, like just sitting out there and letting the words kind of soak in and meditating on them and focusing in. I always thought just because people are not singing does not mean that they're not connecting with God.
Yeah.
And there's a lot going on in their heads, and I guess bringing in the psychology piece of me, I think worship is thinking about all things God too. I think it's much bigger than music. So I kind of look at it
Okay,
that
there you
way.
go. I was hoping we were going to get there. Talk to me more about that. Did you hear what he said? Tell him what you just said.
I think worship is a lot bigger than just music. It's thinking about all things God. It's responding to what God's doing and things like that.
Yeah, because the tendency is, if we hire a worship pastor, what's the first thing that comes to mind? The music. Can they play? Can they sing? He or she. Well, there is, and I've talked to him, and anybody who's worked here in worship, but multitudes of time that even the worship space, if you look on the screens, I can't see the screen, I can see it back there, but we have a worship space, and so what does that mean? What does it mean for flow? I mean, we sit down every week and talk about flow. We change it, we tweak it. What's it mean? Does worship can keep people encounter God through Susan's prayers? Mm-hmm. I shouldn't be talking here. You should be. I'm giving you hints.
I do think
here.
about mood, because you want to make it easy for people to get into that reflective state, and you don't want to have anything that's going to jar them out of that or be distracting necessarily. So I do think about that. It's the visual piece that's new to me, because for whatever reason, one of my billion majors when I was in college was visual design, and it was organizing things and graphic design type of stuff. I found out real quick I'm really bad at that. So that only lasted about a semester. So I'm getting better at being more attentive to the visual part of worship, but that's my area that's kind of new to me that I need to keep growing into.
Yeah. So for you then, it's to identify who in the church has that kind of a gift.
Mary Lou.
Okay, I mean, that'd be one.
Cinda.
Yeah. Sarah, people like that who can help us. I mean, Sarah came up with this, and back behind, and Mary Lou and Cinda help. I mean, a variety of people help us. So that all matters. But even the audio technical stuff, the audio visual, all of that matters too now. I mean, way more than it used to. Because those of you on live stream, I mean, if you weren't hearing us, you'd maybe see this, and you go, well, what's the big deal? So all that matters. All that matters. And that's why, shameless plug, we could use all the help we could get if you'd like to help us in the technology world. There you go. All right. Okay. Let's move to the Brewery Church.
Okay.
Okay, talk to us about that.
Okay.
Where is it? What goes on? Who's involved? What do you talk about? Do people really get drunk? That's a question. Okay, you know what I'm saying.
Okay. So we meet every Monday night at Augustino Brewing. It's at Central and Tyler. It's at 7:30 p.m. And as I kind of mentioned before, Brewery Church is kind of designed for my friends that I couldn't get to come to a normal church. So it was intended to be a place for them. Now, we're still kind of tweaking things, but one of the big challenges is trying to figure out how to make a group where people can be at all different places in their spiritual journey. In a typical church, people are probably somewhat like-minded. Well, we're shooting for people who are all over the place in what they think. They might think like me, they might think the exact opposite of me, but if they're open to exploring, then we want them there. So we're trying to make a format and a meeting where people can start their journey or go deeper and go as deep as they want to go. So sort of put them in the driver's seat for their spiritual journey. And it's a good challenge, but that's a challenge.
And, there are days when Nathan can come in a little bit on the frustrated side just because of certain topics that can just, hit the wall, like the resurrection. Tell them about that.
That actually surprised me a little bit. We went through an apologetics series, and I always try to state up front.
Tell them what apologetics means, just in case they don't know.
It's evidence for God, that type of thing. So we were looking at all the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, because the idea that Jesus would come back from the dead, or maybe I should say, the idea that anyone would come back from the dead is a wild claim to somebody who didn't grow up in the church. So we were trying to put some evidence behind that to make it a little bit more easy to trust that claim and kind of put a foundation underneath that belief. But that topic was met with more resistance than I expected. And I always tell them up front, you guys don't have to believe what I believe. I just want them to explore, because if they're coming at this from, maybe we get atheists sometimes, agnostics, and I enjoy talking to those people. That's who I'm shooting for. But I always want to put them in the driver's seat, because they have to make their own decision. So for me, I'll give them some meat, to chew on, but I really just want to keep them engaged in the material and exploring, because as long as I do that, I feel like God can continue to work and grow, and they've got a choice in that too. So even though I set that up like that, and try to give them some freedom, it was still met with more resistance than I expected, and I realized a lot hinges on that topic. And so I try to be sensitive, because their identities are tied to their view of the world. And when you start to poke around in some of those deeper questions, you can hit some nerves, and not on purpose or anything. But that's kind of goes back to trying to be a mediator, or trying to be as gracious as we can. And we're trying to really build friendships with these people so they're comfortable, because I know that the subject material is going to be hard in places, but we want to make it easy for them to address the tough questions if they want to. So.
Yeah. And what I remember when you first started was some of those that were somewhat of an obstacle to what you were wanting to do were pastors. A couple pastors showed up and felt like they had to fix everybody and give them all the answers. And so the last thing we need is pastors going in. That's why I've not gone, for one reason. Not that I wanted to even say anything, but I just felt that, I think it's good that it allows you to lead that, and it allows them to have the conversation. I'm going to go and observe more than anything. But I know I did call a particular pastor and say, it might be best if you just stayed home for now, because it's not up to us to go in and fix them. Our call is just to listen and then to let him do his thing. So, and then a lot of the comments that can be negative can come from either pastors or the churches, when I think, well, who are we trying to reach here? And that's what he deals with. And if he had, he has a soft heart, but if it was much softer, he'd never sleep at night ever because of some of those comments. They're nasty. They're nasty.
Yeah, we've been told we're heretical, we're false teachers, we're going to hell, we're drunkards, all kinds of stuff. So it's kind of shocking, but what that did for me, when I get comments like that, it allows me to sympathize with the people I'm trying to reach, because I think that I'm tapping into a little bit of their experience. Now, like I said a couple weeks ago when I spoke, I grew up in the church. I love being here. I love my home church. And I have a different context to interpret those comments. Like, I know that it's a minority of people, right? But I don't think that my friends necessarily know that, or it seems like a growing number. So we do have an interesting challenge, though, because there's not a lot of people trying to do what we're trying to do. And how do you make a church for people who haven't started their journey yet? Like, think about, what would we expect from them in terms of beliefs or doctrine? Because that becomes very difficult. I almost feel like some people are trying to apply 25 years of spiritual journey to a person immediately.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
really, there's 20 years that they need to walk through. So we're trying to think about, what should we expect from these people and meeting them where they're at. And it is really hard, because we don't see a lot of other churches trying to do what we're doing. Sometimes I even regret calling it church in a brewery, because that term comes with so much baggage to this particular group we're trying to reach, and my age group. So I almost think, if we're looking at the mountain, I'm trying to be the no phase, where it's like a handshake, right? Or that'd be the hello stage.
That'd be the hello.
So we're trying to be the handshake. They start their spiritual journey, but can go further within our group. Or maybe they decide they want to go to a regular church so they can transition off. But we do feel misunderstood. And maybe it'd be easier if there's more of us, but there are more and more groups like ours popping up. Like, we know of 4 or 5 now. When we started, we didn't know of any.
Yeah. Well, and some of the language, what is used out there in the church world, it would be called like fresh expressions. You've probably heard that, but or maybe you haven't. But in our conference, at least, they would talk about, Mitch Reese and I would talk about fresh expressions. They're ways that are new and fresh, that would not be, hey, come to church, because they're not coming. So how do we, the reality is our paradigm has to shift. How we do church means it's not just open the doors and let's smile real pretty and give a handshake and we think they're going to come. It's just, those days are over. They're just over. So how do we do this? We've had a lot of this conversation in board and leadership meeting and other things, but fresh expressions are from the steeple to the street. What does that look like? And that's what we're talking about here. It's very missional. It's not attractive. The attractive church, that model's gone. That's how a lot of the mega churches were born, but really that model's gone. So it's much more missional, and that's what you're doing. So, you've got some people that are there every week, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they're your regular attenders. You've got membership vows and everything probably, right?
We don't do membership.
I'm not sure if I find that in Scripture, but be that as it may. You've got an eclectic group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would be the youngest person to the oldest person that you can think of right offhand?
Just 21, probably the early 70s. Heath Asbury in his 70s. Okay.
Yeah, Heath is a part of the team back there, and so 21 to 70, 71, something like that. That's quite a range. And then anything from no Christian to maybe to possibly a Christian, to an atheist, to a Jew, Jewish rabbi
Mm-hmm.
to whatever, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's quite a group. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you think about, what are you doing right now? What are you teaching now, or what are you preaching on?
We've
or
been
speaking?
talking about parables of Jesus.
The parables of Jesus.
Yeah. And I'll throw a fun question in there, like,
Yeah.
let's see. This past week we asked who would win in a fight, Batman or Iron Man. So that's my kind of icebreaker question. And then we'll get into a parable and be like, what does this mean? And what does it mean about you? And things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if you've referenced The Chosen in the Brewery Church, but he also does a podcast, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we started watching The Chosen. I started watching The Chosen with some of the young adults here, and then I do a podcast on it, on each episode, with a guy from the Brewery Church and two of my friends back home who, when they found out I was doing the Brewery Church here, they were like, oh, are you going to do this in Indiana? I'm like, no. They're like, tell us if you have something online. I said, okay. So I got them in there, and really part of the reason I did that was because I wanted to give people a window into the type of discussions that we have at group. And I also wanted to give the current group a window into the type of discussions I want to have, because like I said, I feel like some of these different groups don't know how to talk to each other yet. I see the different denominations come in and kind of butt heads a little bit.
Yep.
And I see the Christians and the non-Christians, they don't know how to talk to each other. And so they kind of bristle, and I'm trying to figure out how to show them how these groups can coexist and all learn together. So we started making this podcast as a way to do that, and maybe to draw in some new people who liked the type of discussion that we were doing. So that's been really fun. I mean, one guy on the podcast, I think he's probably a brand new Christian. He's just gotten interested in spirituality over the past year or so from things that he saw in mainstream movies. So he saw some spiritual themes, and he wanted to explore the Bible because he saw some connections. But he didn't know who any of the characters were hardly when we started watching The Chosen. And it's been really, like, his reactions are fresh. And that's been really exciting for me. And there's another guy, he considers himself non-religious, but he comes to Brewery Church, and he's on that podcast. So, and my other friend, I know that he struggled with some doubt, but he also grew up as a Christian, and he would still claim that faith too. So we got that group together, that eclectic mix on the podcast, and the difference between what we do there and maybe a church like this or something is, I'm not so much worried about accurate theology and doctrine. I just want to get them talking, and I just want to get them intrigued so that we all keep exploring. And honestly, just that alone, a lot of us at Brewery Church, we go home and we look stuff up because we heard this or we heard that, and we want to find out, oh, where did that come from? And so even just sharing openly and not worrying as much about the accuracy has caused us all to grow. I think doctrine is important, but that's a step down the road from where these guys are.
Well, and for some reason, I don't know if any of you agree with this or not, but I think there are times that we think we need to help and assist God.
Yeah.
To help them come to faith. Now, don't take me wrong here. God doesn't need us at all to see that happens. He does invite us to be a part of that. And, for us who live under a Wesleyan umbrella, there's something called prevenient grace, where God is wooing. And so if God is wooing the people you're talking to, then His Spirit's going to bring them to a point of saying yes. So it's not up to you. Mm-hmm. Now, it's up to you to be obedient, but it's not up to you to convict or, to convert, because you can't. So I think sometimes we take that and push it too hard in that sense.
The things that keep sticking with me, when we watch The Chosen, I think it's episode 4, with the fish, when he says, gather all kinds of people or all kinds of fish, I'll sort them out later. I feel like that's my job. Get all the people in this room and help them connect, all kinds. And then I came across the parable of the weeds, and that blew my mind. So I brought that into brewery church.
Right.
And basically, farmers got these weeds that are growing up. Some enemy came in and sowed weeds in his wheat field overnight. Well, here's what I didn't know. When I started looking into this parable, in that time, in that culture, there was a weed called bearded darnel. It looks just like wheat. So you don't know what's weeds and what's a wheat.
We call it cheat. I mean, serious.
Is it really?
You farmers, wheat farmers, we have what's called cheat. It looks just like the wheat, but it's cheat. It's light. There's no wheat in it. It's a fake.
Yeah. Well, I took that parable really seriously because I feel like, well, maybe I can't really tell where people are at spiritually. I mean, even if you look into church, you don't really know sometimes. So let them all grow together. Now, if I was going to use an analogy about how hard that is, sometimes it'd be like taking a far-right Republican and a far-left Democrat and sit them at a table together and ask them to have a fun conversation about politics. I mean, that's almost the role that we feel like we're in. I feel like almost a sense of grief at times, because as we try to do this, I realize how difficult it is, and maybe we've never had to do it before. For whatever reason, I don't know, but we haven't learned to get outside of our social circle. Because, I'm going to be honest, if I go to a party or something, I'm probably going to find like-minded people to talk to, right? So that's our nature. So to try to break outside of that takes a whole different set of skills. And I almost feel like I'm observing how badly we need those skills, like, quicker.
Especially in a day of social media.
Yeah.
Where anybody can get behind the computer or on your phone and type anything you want. We experienced that even at Asbury today with some people that accuse us of some things. And so, you can get behind a computer and say anything you want. But to actually sit down, because I said, well, here's the phone number if you'd like to call. Well, I never got a call. But, so those kind of things, just so we can have conversation. People don't know how to converse.
Right.
And do it in a civil way and respect one another, to where, even to say to agree to disagree, we're still disagreeing.
Right.
So that's kind of problematic at times too. But at least to be able to say, okay, we own it. I own it. This is where I'm at. This is where you're at. We own that. But we're not going to kill each other over it.
Right.
And unfortunately, in politics and in the life of the church, that's where we find ourselves, because the church has become a microcosm of our political system so often, at least our denomination. And so we've been enculturated in that, and we don't know how to act like Christians should act.
Right. Well, here's what's interesting about my life, because I mentioned when I came here, I was fresh out of a divorce. And that was really, really hard. The good that I can see that came out of that situation, I got my skills to do the brewery church from 5 years of marriage counseling. And if I hadn't gone through that, there's no way I would be able to do this now. So I can at least look at that and be like, okay, this is one way that God can redeem this mess in my life.
Yeah, there is nothing that cannot be redeemed. Just had this conversation the other day with someone. There is nothing, including divorce, and it was in fact talking with someone about that. So we need to be mindful. It's not like you're saying, oh, I'm sure glad I got a divorce so I could go through counseling, I could learn how to talk to people, that way I could have brewery church discussion. That's not what you're saying. But God can take something that can be a very difficult time like you went through. And I believe you came to Asbury at the right time for people to walk alongside you, to hold you up through a difficult time, because it was tough. There were tough days. So, just to sort that out, be sounding board for you and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I felt like some days I go home, I'd be like, I feel like this is the only stable part of my life.
And that's scary. Well, it's such good stuff, and especially with the brewery church, and I would just like to encourage us as a church here at Asbury, to think about what's that look like to walk alongside Nathan and others. David, I know you're kind of interested in maybe being a part of that team as well, and so I think if we get a few more team members and stuff, that would be a good thing. in how we can, walk alongside and share the gospel in a way that's not beating somebody over the head with a Bible and so forth. So I think it's a great ministry, and we're glad that you're here. I think you're all glad that he's here. Amen. So we're gonna reel it in. An hour gets by in a pretty big hurry, but I guess like with anyone else, if you could leave these folks with something that maybe you'd like to share tonight. I didn't warn you of this either, but you're good at thinking on your feet. So what might that be?
Am I?
Yeah, it might take you 3 or 4 hours, but
I kind of mentioned this when I spoke a couple weeks ago too. But I kind of think one of the most valuable things that we could do is to find somebody who's not like us and start going to lunch, start going to coffee with them, because we've seen how divided everything is in America right now, and even in religion and politics. Everywhere we've kind of come to a place where we're getting pretty divided. I can even see it between young people and older people and things like that. I think the way we can start breaking down some of those walls and bringing people back together is to actually sit down with somebody and hear their story, who sees the world a little bit differently than we do. Because I think that's the way that we start to empathize, and then we start to feel like they're a friend. It doesn't mean that we have to believe what they believe or see the world the way they do, but it just humanizes them. So yeah. I think that can be part of the solution, but I also think that's the road for all of us sharing God with people.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask you to do was, just in case, because we should never assume that people know what the word podcast means.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. So would you explain that to those?
Well, I remember when I didn't know what that meant, and it came out in college, I was like, what is this thing? This is never going to take off. And of course, I listen to podcasts like all the time now.
Yeah, I go in his office and he won't answer, and he's got things in his ears.
It's basically kind of like an audio recording. It could be a solo conversation, like a presentation on something, like an audio book, or it could be a conversation between people. So that's kind of what it is. So when we do ours for the Brewery Church right now, after we watch an episode of The Chosen on our own, we all get on Zoom, and the 4 of us talk through the episode. And so that's what our podcast is. It's just a round table discussion. That's what we call it.
Yeah. So in case any of you want to, even here in the life of the church, one, you can listen to Nathan as far as the Brewery Church podcast and the Chosen podcast, But we also have the Sermon Discussion Let's Chat podcast. It's on our Facebook page. You click on that, then it takes you to a place where you actually click as far as the podcast itself. There's a play button there. Yesterday, it was Susan and I, based on Susan's sermon from Sunday, Do You Love Me? The week before was Nathan, when he was talking about Do You Doubt? I highly encourage you to listen to that, because it's an apologetic. It's a defense of Scripture, and it's really good for those who struggle with that. So those are some things, and we're going to release some more. We've got like 4, I think, ready to be released, of conversations that we've had with people who have gone through COVID. It's not necessarily a faith conversation, but how did COVID impact? For example, Susan interviewed someone who works in a mortuary, and so a podcast on how that. You think about how COVID interrupted that and all that went with that. You've done one, and variety. So those will be coming out soon. So we'll help you with that if you need to know that. So, anyways, well, Nathan, we're glad you're on board, brother. Worship, marketing, Brewery Church, podcasting, all those things that are the fine print under worship pastor, part-time. But we're glad that you're here, and I know that they're glad that you're here. Amen. I know we've clapped once, but we're grateful. So we really appreciate your ministry. Mr. and Mrs. Snyder, we're glad he's here. And so I want to lift him up in prayer, and then I'm going to introduce the next speaker next week. So if you'll join me in prayer. Lord God, we give you thanks for Nathan. We're thankful so much that you've brought him here to Asbury, and that you've done a great work in his life, and that you're doing a work in him in such a way that it impacts others, especially those who maybe never heard about you. Thank you for his heart for you. Thank you for his heart for those especially who don't know you, who are out there struggling, just trying to sort it all out. Pray that you'd guide him and direct him in that, as well as his work here at the church, and that you just continue to watch and guide and bless him. Thank you that you blessed us as a result of him being here, and we give you thanks and we give you praise and we give you glory. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. All right, I got to stand for this. If you'll put this picture up, Michael, of the next speaker. Oh, Velma Tim. Velma Tim, she comes from the Cameroon, from Africa. She pastors in eastern Kansas, and oh my gosh, I am excited that she's going to come and share some of the story of how she ends up in America, serving in the church, from a country where there's a lot of difficulties, persecution in the church, all these kind of things. It is going to be awesome. I just talked to her yesterday, I think it was, a day before, whatever it was, and she is so excited to come, and so you're going to love it. Velma Tim, next week. This is going to be our last one for this go-around, and then 2 weeks from tonight, they have a little preschool graduation here. So this will be the last one next week, and then we'll think about some things for the summer. Stay tuned. Fresh expressions, all right? Fresh expressions. So with that in mind, thanks so much for coming. God bless you all. And here's our little outro video. You all have a great night, all right? Here we go.